So I want to go back, okay? And I'm going to go back to one of the previous chapters because I was looking through this. I've got some things going on at work and in life, and we got state session coming up. And we were joking at the beginning about how Noel and I went toe to toe at last year's state session. So these two paragraphs, I want everybody to keep in mind as we start talking about the bylaws, right? The bylaws are here to protect us. They're here for a reason. The only way the bylaws can change is if we, as the delegate bodies of the Connecticut State, or of your local Grange, your Pomona Grange, the state Grange, and the national Grange, if we institute the change. Otherwise, it's the rules we have to live with. All right. But this really sums a lot of things up when it all gets tough, right? And this was on page 148, pushing pause. It sounds paradoxical, but even though leaders must have the confidence to act quickly, they just can't flip a switch. They need to move at a pace the organization can absorb. This does not mean slowing down, but it does mean we need to pause occasionally so we can continually and accurately assess today's ever-changing reality. Then after that brief pause, we will have a greater understanding that helps us anticipate scenarios of what lies ahead. I think I thought that was a great way for us to start this, because when we get into the middle of something in our Grange and it's starting to get a little technical, we gotta tap the brakes a little bit and make sure that we're in compliance with our bylaws, with the national Grange's bylaws, the state Grange's bylaws, and frankly, in some cases, somebody's rights. So just because we're having a discussion and we need to tap the brakes doesn't mean we're not making progress, right? These rules are in place, these laws, these constitutions, they're all in place to make us a stronger organization, to make us better leaders by adhering to them. So no, you can go ahead and ask it now. You don't need to wait.
Okay. Just with that, so I was reading the State Granger, and Master Robert Buck said another issue is asking for projects and paperwork to be completed last minute. Please allow people appropriate time to perform tasks that you're asking of them whenever possible. I was just kind of wondering the flip side of that. I hate to be a nag, and I know that all women really do hate to ask twice for things, but how long is too long? When do I have to think that something was just procrastinated on and then forgotten?
I guess that's a judgment call on your behalf, right? The problem is in some cases is it's not one person doing the research, right? There's a process you have to go through, and let's use as an example, and it's a good example, right? The Wallingford grant, the people and they started using the word lean, right? And then now it's like, no, we got to tap the brakes because that's a specific way that's
Right.
handled, right?
Nobody actually mentioned that in the town of Wallingford until it somehow got interpreted that way at the state Grange
And
level.
no. Those words were used. Those words were used in an email. Okay, so we had to tap the brakes.
I
Now,
was at the meeting and nobody said lean.
Let's not talk about
no,
specific cases here. That's not the place for this. The Rob's article addresses, and it's not not one,
Oh,
but
I didn't
it's
know. I didn't take
many.
it personally. I was
No, no,
just like,
no.
I mean,
I,
and I have not requested anything yet.
yeah,
But
I can
it's
answer.
something that I've run into in a lot of other places that it's like, well, how long is too long? I mean, me typically, I can usually, if I have a busy week, I can't get to something like at any point during the week. So more than a week would probably be ideal. 2 weeks would be okay. But if it goes more than 2 weeks, chances are I've just put it on the back burner and I need to be harassed.
Well, look at it this way, right? You ask for something at a Grange meeting, right? Your Grange doesn't meet for a month. Is waiting a month for the response from the people you asked for, is that acceptable? Right?
In that instance, but if I'm asking for, say, can you find me a letter or a number or a form that I would need to use to apply for something else, like a grant or, something of that nature, then how long does it take for you to just dig up a form and shoot me a copy?
Again, I think that's perspective on the requester's behalf, right? If they think one day is not enough, then that they're going to start asking on day 2. If they think a week is not enough, they're going to start asking on day 8. I think it's a perspective thing. But right, if it's not something as what one would consider as simple as that, most of these groups meet every 2 weeks, once a month, et cetera, et cetera. So, and
If
so
I might
I think
be
it's perspective.
allowed to chime in, if it's a simple request, then it shouldn't take that much time. A phone number, a form, maybe if you don't hear by the middle of the week following, that's reasonable to just give a little tickler call and remind the person. The whole thing of my comments actually came because our PR director, co-director, was getting concerned that she was being asked to do things, post haste, that is, like within the week, um, given the fact that she's got health issues, she works a full-time job, and she serves 30 plus Granges, several of which could have requests in for materials at any one time. So, if you're asking for something in a week or less, this was of a concern to her. So that was where the whole issue came from, without my putting names in my article. But as you can see, given what I just told you about her responsibilities, personal and professional, to ask something in a few days or a week, it's rather onerous on her. So that, again, as Jody said, it depends on the situation. There is no one answer. I hope that clarifies my comments.
Yes. Can I ask another question, just because we're in the process of, our bylaws committee is meeting as we speak, we've met twice and we just got over our agricultural fair, so we're still catching our breath, but we're going to meet again before our next meeting. And so when we make changes to the bylaws, when does that take effect?
What's the vote? So I'm sure Phil's going to cover that in his presentation, I would imagine. And if he doesn't, you can nag him immediately. You don't have
Okay.
to wait any length of time.
All righty, thank you. I'm okay with that.
So, all right. So without further ado, it is our pleasure to have, even though he's one of our own, to have Phil Prelli, who is the past chairman of the board of directors of the Connecticut State Grange, and the past overseer of the National Grange and the current priest archon, correct? Analyst? Archon. One of the priests of the assembly. And he is going to speak to us this evening, and he gave us all a homework assignment. So everybody, hopefully everybody had a chance to at least review those sections. Hopefully you read them in full, but Phil, it's all yours, sir. You said something, Todd, and you were on mute.
I said I better get unmuted. And when Jody called and asked if I do this, I was very happy to say I wanted to, but as all you know, I've tried to participate in most of the meetings we've had. I think it's important, and I want to break this down a couple of ways. I want to talk about what's important about bylaws in general, but then what's important about our bylaws and how they affect us as an organization. Because we as leaders, if we want to be leaders in our organization, have to understand the steps we need to take and how we look at those. So starting with, and then I want to go through some of the things. We're not going to go through every single line of the stuff I asked you to read. I did that as an example, so you would get an example of how bylaws should go. And what I wanted to start with, what is important about having bylaws in a constitution? And when we really look at the bylaws, the first thing, and I think that there's 4 basic points I want to bring up under this, but the first thing, it defines what your association is. If you think about it, it actually starts the groundwork of defining you as a group. And the first thing that most of your bylaws should do, and whether they're at the national level or down to your community Grange, should provide your official name. Here you've now put officially what your name is in the organization. It also puts in and defines what you really stand for. When you think about it, what you are as an organization. We all like to say, well, we're C10s or we're C5s in the IRS code, but that's not what we are. The bylaws define what our organization does. The second thing the bylaws do, and if anybody has any questions along the way, please interrupt because it makes it easier for all of us. But the second thing is that it sets a standard for all the subgroups in your organization. When you think about it, what our bylaws do across the country, it sets a standard for what Granges are. All Granges throughout the country have to follow the same operation and general rules. Think about that. The Granges in Oregon or Washington, we've had representatives from the Washington State Grange. The Granges in those have to follow the same rules as the Granges in Connecticut. Or if you belong to another organization that has bylaws that cover different states, you all follow the same rules. So that's what the bylaws do. It sets the standard. And what's key about setting the standard throughout the country is that when something happens in one part of the country, in a court case, it now can be used in another part of the country. And our bylaws have been tested in court cases, and our bylaws have won in court cases. For many of you aware, a few years ago, not a couple of years ago, we finally settled it. I think it's been for about 8 years or 10 years. We had a fight with what used to be the California State Grange. And one of the things the National Grange had to do was fight that to ensure that our bylaws stayed constant across the country. And we won those cases because of what our bylaws said and previous court cases in other parts of the United States that showed our bylaws. So what you've done now is set your base and you've set your understanding for what your organization is and what you expect of your organization. And for those of us who lived through that, you'll understand that that was a very difficult time. We have a couple of past state masters who had to survive part of that with us. It also provides guidance. The third thing is it provides guidance to the leaders. So if you are a leader, if you're a subordinate president, or if you're a community Grange president, subordinate master, whichever you call yourself, if you are one of the leaders in the state Grange or whatever, the bylaws provide you guidance. And not only that, but you have to then react to sometimes what that guidance is. And sometimes as the subordinate Grange president, you have to make decisions on what the bylaws say. And if you really read the bylaws of the National Grange, it will tell you, you make decisions. And if you don't make the decision, it goes on to the state Grange master. But I think the most important point, and I think the point, and Jody actually alluded to this, that most people don't understand what the bylaws give. It is a protection to every individual member. There's a protection in there, and the rights of every individual member is protected. So when you go through the guidelines, and there's a lot of people who say, oh, the bylaws only protect the leaders. They don't. It's just the opposite. The bylaws make sure the leaders protect the members. And that's a key point in any bylaws. So I guess I would throw it open and say, is there any questions about the standard part about the bylaws, or before we get into the National Grange bylaws as such? Either I'm very boring or.
No, Phil, I really appreciate what you said, because in the first part of the digest, where it gives the old Constitution of I think of Oliver Hudson Kelly, and then it gives the revised one. Everything that you just said, that you just summed up that whole thing of the Constitution, basically because it defines us, where we're going, what we're doing. You know, it's just you hit the nail on the head. What we are, you know, it's all in there. I think everybody should read that first couple of pages. Well, if you haven't, or if you have glanced over it, read it again. It's enlightening. Thank
And
you.
I think that was done in 1876 or 1867. I mean, that's.
Well, what is it they say? The more times change, the more things remain the same.
So let's go on and talk a little bit about the National Grange Digest, and not in the details of some of those pages, but what we're talking about and what a digest said. There's a reason that it's the largest digest of all. The National Grange Digest is 50 pages long, approximately, without the index and all the lead-in information. It's about 50 pages. And it is the controlling document for every single Grange in the United States. Whether it's the Connecticut State Grange, whether it's your Wallingford Grange, whether it's Riverton Grange, it is the controlling document. And as Jody said, it may be modified or amended. And the question is, when do the digests take effect? You will look at one of the sections in there, in the National Grange Digest, it'll say any change to the digest takes effect on passage unless otherwise specified. So Stephanie, in answer to your question, when do the bylaw changes take effect? I'd have to look at what your current bylaws of your Grange say, whether it says it has to hold over a meeting. But upon actual passage of the bylaws, unless somebody says this is going to take effect in a month, they take effect immediately. So when we make a bylaw change to the National Grange bylaws at National Grange session, they take effect immediately on the passage of those bylaws. So sometimes a bylaw change will not take effect for a day if you have a reconsideration, if you have to be able to give it a reconsideration vote. But usually it's the final passage of any bylaw changes. National Grange does things a little different than the Connecticut State Grange does it, if you've seen that, or I'm sure your Grange does it, in that you adopt a bill, you adopt a resolution, but it's not finally passed until the whole committee report is adopted. So it's a little different. So, but once that committee report would be adopted, any change to the National Grange Digest would take effect. So if your bylaws say it takes 2 meetings, you have the first reading, and then the second reading you take a vote on the bylaw changes. At the point that passes, those bylaws take effect. So Stephanie, does that sort of answer your question? Yes, okay. But the key of any bylaws is that you have a way of amending them, and that's put in your bylaws. So most bylaws, usually it's the last section of any bylaws I've ever seen, has in there, these can be amended, and they give the steps of how you amend your bylaws. Right? And there's some very standard bylaw forms, and I think Todd has a couple examples that if if a Grange wanted to change their bylaws, we have some standard forms. You know, it's not just plug in numbers, but it gives you an outline of how to write your bylaws. The other thing that the National Grange bylaws has is all the procedures to be used, including up to and hopefully never having to be used as a Grange trial. In my history, and I think looking at this group, I'm the senior member here. There's only been one Grange trial in the state of Connecticut that I'm aware of. And that happened around 1970. And one thing, my father at the time was active in the Connecticut State Grange. He said to me, "Hope you never have to live through a Grange trial." Well, I've had the problem of living through a couple of them, and he was absolutely right, because it's a very difficult process. But that's all laid out in our bylaws. And that's what I'm saying about protecting members. That a leader just can't, you know, just say, "I'm going to do this," and move forward and throw, you know, put a penalty on a Grange member, because there are rules we have to follow. And there's steps we have to follow. And they're very difficult. And they should be very difficult. But those are there. And the key, and I brought this up earlier, when a question on the bylaws, even the National Grange bylaws, comes up, the president of the Grange, where that question is raised, has the right to make the decision on what the bylaws say. Now, Jody has talked about this in the past, and others, is we've all been in the position where we've had to make decisions on bylaws and everything. We don't just make them ourselves. I recommend to you, if you have to make a decision on the bylaws, talk to another person you know and you respect in the same office, in the same level, or even a higher level. As a community Grange president, take the time just to ask the question to the state Grange president, or ask the question to a member of the executive committee who's gone through that, or ask it to another one of your community Grange masters. Because anytime I had to make a decision on the bylaws, I bet you I made 5 calls to other state Grange presidents. I would put Jody or Noel or Rob probably hasn't had quite as many to do, but I would say to you, isn't that true? Anytime you had to do it, you just didn't do it on your own. You went out and you got it, because it's very important. Because the step is, as a local leader, you make a ruling. If the person doesn't like it, they then can appeal it to the state Grange president. And then the state Grange president has to make a ruling. And if they don't like that, they can appeal it to the national Grange president. And if they don't like the national Grange president's ruling, they have the right to appeal it to the Assembly of Demeter. And you never want to go through all those steps. You, as the leader, don't want to put yourself in the point that you're being subjected to adverse rules.
But how would a leader ever make a decision without a full vote of their membership?
Because if it's a question on the bylaws, Stephanie,
Just a
you
question.
as the leader have the right to interpret the bylaws.
Mm-hmm.
Those include your bylaws, they include the Connecticut State Grange bylaws, and they include the National Grange bylaws. But again, you have to be very careful on how you do that interpretation. I know that I never took it, you know, I never made a quick decision on any question of a bylaws. And I always made sure I talked to somebody else about it. And so you need to form those groups and be willing to talk to somebody. And
But a bylaws committee can meet anytime that, you know, it's been many years since ours has been looked at, so there's no problem with it.
When I get to the community Grange bylaws, I'm actually going to go over that. So that might be a point to hold that until that discussion, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
So that's the National Grange bylaws, and that's what we're doing. Now, there's times, if you look at how to change the National Grange bylaws, there are places that it takes a 2/3 or a 5/6 votes. It will pass in one session with a 5/6 vote, and that changed about 8 years ago, Jody? I'm guessing. Before that,
Yeah.
it took 2 years at a 2/3 vote to pass some of the things in the bylaws. And I want to give you an example because it's an example that a lot of us have worked on. We have tried to change a section of the bylaws and the amount of money a Grange can keep if they sell their property. And we'll talk about that later on. And it's gone through, and we've made it through 1 year on a 2/3 vote. And the second year we got defeated. And so that makes it very difficult. Bylaws are difficult to change. I will tell you, bylaws should be difficult to change because they're part of what makes our organization work so well. And they're part of the history, and there's proven court cases about that use our bylaws. So they shouldn't be easily changed. So that's a difficult step in the bylaws. Any questions about National Grange bylaws in all 50 pages? Because I know you all wanted to read it in detail. And I'm willing to bet that there's not a person sitting here that's read all 50 pages of the latest bylaws in detail. And that includes me. They change, and sometimes you don't keep up with it, but you go back and you look at them when you have to look at them.
So Phil, can you just elaborate a little more on what you mean by only, and it's only the president of the master that has the authority to interpret in a ruling. Can you just get a little more into that? What does it mean to interpret the bylaws?
If you are, thank you, Jody. If you are asked a question about how a procedure goes, or if you say, no, we can't do that because the bylaws don't allow it, and somebody raises a question on the bylaws, it is up to you then to go back and do the research in the bylaws and look at what the bylaws are and check with other people on that. The only person in any Grange, and that includes, if we had a question raised and David Roberts is the president of my Grange, there's a question raised at Riverton Grange. I can't give the answer to I can't give the official interpretation, or Jody at Econ Grange can't give the official interpretation of what the bylaws say. We can talk about it all we want and try to put our opinion in, but it's up to the president of that Grange to do the research and make an official opinion on the bylaws. And then if I don't happen to like their interpretation or somebody else doesn't, I have the right to appeal it to the state Grange president. And then Rob has to then make an official decision. And then every interpretation of the bylaws that the National Grange Master makes during the year is given to the Grange Law Committee at National Grange. And they have to look over those bylaws. And if they don't think they're right at that point, they can bring a resolution forward to the delegate body. So it's a very intricate step. But you as president of your Grange, or you as hopefully the leader of your Grange, it's up to you to say, wait a minute, I will get an answer on what the bylaws say, and I will make an interpretation of that. Doesn't mean you have to do it right then. It doesn't mean you have to do that right then. You need to take a step back.
Well, now to the point of the conversation we had earlier, right? What would be a reasonable expectation? And I would imagine that the answer is different based upon what clause is being challenged. But what would you consider to be a reasonable expectation on a response to a question on the bylaws?
If it's raised within a meeting, it would be, your response would have to be before the next meeting. if it's raised that it's an issue that's happening in your Grange and has an immediate effect, your response has to be as quickly as you can get the proper answers. And that, I'm saying, if your question about the proper procedures of, excuse me, handling a bill or something like that, you need to have that response back to those individuals within a couple of days. Because you need to keep your organization moving forward. Does that answer your question, Jody, or?
Well, it was really fitting to the conversation earlier, I
Yeah.
thought.
It's not, you have to weigh how important and what effect that is going to have on your Grange. If somebody's questioning, I'll use the example. Excuse me, let me get a drink of water. If somebody is questioning the way the treasurer is paying bills, and it's being questioned that they're not following the bylaws and handling the bills correctly, you think you can wait for the next meeting? You as a leader have to decide how important that is and get the answer done. And in that case, I would think the next day, because most of our meetings are at night and Rob would not like to call at 10 o'clock at night, I would call the State Grange Master. And I would say to him, hey, I've had this question on how the bills are being paid. It doesn't appear they're right. The executive committee hasn't looked at them or whatever. What should I do? And what is my ruling on this? Or how should I make this ruling? And Rob would make a suggestion to you. You don't have to take a suggestion. You might call another Grange president and say, hey, well, how's your Grange do that? And you would make a ruling. And then if that's questioned, it would move up. But you need to weigh how important that issue is and how quickly you need to respond to it. Okay, hopefully, I'm not trying to be elusive on that. It's just a difficult question to answer.
Right, and yeah, I don't think there's a perfect answer, right? But for me, I think you answered it pretty well.
Phil, I have a question.
Yeah.
You said if somebody questions the bylaw, you go, I'm the president of Econc and now I'm the president of our Pomona.
Okay.
So would I go right to Bob or would I call around? Would I go to past state masters?
All the above?
Okay.
All the above, whatever you feel comfortable with. I mean, when I was State Grange Master, if I had a question, I talked to previous State Grange Masters. I talked to State Grange Masters I knew. I talked to people within our organization that I trusted that might have never even been president. You need to get a feel for people that you trust. In your case, would you talk to your father? Maybe not, but you could call me, you know.
Yeah. I'd probably call Steve Logan first before I talk to my dad anyways.
And I understand that. All of a sudden my screen got a big good evening on it and I'm trying to get rid of it.
Just remember conflict of interests. Let's not have no nepotism here.
Can I we had a situation at our last meeting. A lot of members were upset because our treasurer went ahead and had some trees taken down before our ag fair. And I understood he was concerned about himself. And he called me and I'm new. So there's an executive committee and I was told I was on it.
Stephanie, you're cutting out.
And I think I told that I'm not on it, but the treasurer, the secretary.
The National Grange bylaws, Stephanie, say that a subordinate Grange executive committee is made up of the master and the elected members of the executive committee. Your bylaws might give you a couple extra members. The master is a member of the executive committee.
Okay, great. So I was a member. He called me, but not as a member of the executive committee. I actually got him to get another estimate on getting these trees down. I understood what he was getting at, but as a new master, I didn't think, oh, this is between meetings. This is going to be way over $500 or $700. We need to call the executive committee. And he called, well, his wife is on the executive committee. And so those two and the three, there was one other guy, and they didn't call him. And I thought that that was wrong. And unfortunately, the response was, what difference does it make? It was a majority, 3 of 4 voted for this.
Okay.
And
I don't want to get in.
I'm
Let me
uncomfortable.
just- Yeah. First of all, the executive committee can't make a decision without the community president being, the community Grange president being there. You can't have an
Community-
exec,
Who's
you
that?
cannot have executive committee without the master of the subordinate Grange president.
Oh, well, this is all done on the telephone anyway.
Let me repeat what I just said.
Yeah.
You cannot have an official meeting of the executive committee without the master present at any Grange level. Unless for some reason the master is incapacitated and somebody has to take their place. When
Is
you're
the
making,
master a voting member of the executive committee or not?
yes,
Okay.
yes. And again, that's the bylaws. So you have the right, and what
But
I
what
would,
defines a meeting? Yeah, what defines a meeting?
anytime you're going to make a decision. You can't make a decision without a bylaws. And later on, we'll see in one of the things we talk about that one of the pages I asked you to read is that every motion has to be recorded so that you have it in your minutes. So if there's ever a question later on, you have that in your minutes. Okay? What I would recommend to you is have a discussion with the state range master and have him, and if he's willing to, send you a letter explaining exactly how the executive committee works and that the executive committee needs to act in a certain way. And that would be you would then make a ruling that you need to follow that. Because in effect, you are, in some respects, if anybody challenges that vote, you would have to make a ruling whether it was legal or not. And Rob, I'm sorry if I put you on the spot. But I think that's the steps I would take there.
You're the featured speaker, so I'm glad to hear that from you. And incidentally, I have expressed opinions on the matter of the tree murders.
Again, I think that it's a broader issue, Rob.
Yes.
Than the tree, yeah.
And there's much, yes. Well,
It's
that's
how the
understood.
executive committee works and how an
Yeah.
official with the executive committee cannot act without meeting with the master.
You know, if I might be so brazen as to say what happened in that instance, people acted out of bounds and things were done.
Yeah.
And we hope that in the future that kind of thing won't happen. And
I'm trying not to address one issue, but instead giving you a scope of how to handle things as a leader. Because we all get in that position. I'll just tell you a little story. When I was first master of our Grange, I was 19 years old. And I had to deal with the company that was next door to our Grange Hall. And anybody in the New England area knows this company, it's Hitchcock Chair. And they wanted some land we had. And I had, as a 19-year-old, had to go meet with the president of Hitchcock Chair. That was not an easy meeting for me at that point. It helped me in my leadership roles, but we were able to accomplish some things. So I think those are the types of steps you need to take as a leader. But Stephanie, those types of issues that you have there, you can talk to somebody who's been a past master or another master in the area that you respect. So that, my phones are going off like crazy here. So that you're not making the decision just on your own. If somebody questions you, how'd you make that decision? I researched it and did some things.
Karen has a question.
Yes, thank you, Karen
Yeah,
McDonald. I've always enjoyed any school of instruction. And I'm just thinking this would be a perfect topic for a school of instruction, defining the responsibilities and limits and boundaries of the executive committee and how it functions. I don't feel, I've been in the Grange for a long time, but I've never really heard it defined clearly. So I'm just thinking everyone could benefit. We have a lot of new Grangers, a lot of new Granges, would be helpful for everybody.
And the question you raised here is a very interesting one, because there's been a National Grange ruling about it in the past year, in that there were some community Granges that the executive committees were making all the decisions for the Grange, and none of the decisions were being brought forward to the Grange. And that's not the purpose. If you look at the installation of officers for the executive committee, it talks about in the time of emergency and need. It's not just when you want to do it. So I think good points that you bring up, but again, that's knowing the bylaws, using the bylaws to your advantage as a leader, but also protecting the rights of all the members, because somebody might question that, say, why was this done? And now you have to make a ruling on it. And you know what? There's something I learned very early as a leader. The first time I believed I was never going to make a mistake, I made a mistake. Because you're always going to make a mistake. That doesn't mean you can't recover from that mistake. Okay? I want to move us along because I got a couple other things I want to go over, and I'll try to go through them a little quicker. The state range bylaws are the second ones we wanted to talk a little bit about. And one of the keys I want to tell you is both the state range bylaws and your community bylaws should have a section to say that you follow the national Grange bylaws and the state Grange bylaws if you're in your community Grange. All right. So you've now incorporated the national Grange bylaws as part of your bylaws. The Connecticut state Grange bylaws do that. So it says that they have to follow the national Grange bylaws. So that's just one of the things. The other key is that sometimes national Grange bylaws or the national Grange gives control to the state Granges to put in their bylaws things that are greater than the national Grange bylaws. One of the examples is, and we've done it in the Connecticut state Grange bylaws now, is the whole thing about alcohol in a Grange building. Okay, if you look at the national Grange bylaws, they're very specific about no alcohol and everything, except that they've given the authority to the national Grange bylaws. The national Grange has given the authority to state Granges for certain instances that they can put in their bylaws, that you can have like a wine tasting or you can have a wine viewing. If you look at what Connecticut's doing, they've gone through that in great detail. And there's other examples of what a state Grange can put in their bylaws, as long as it's not specific and national. And it could never go against national Grange bylaws, but if it's not defined, it can go a little farther. One of the things the state Grange bylaws have to do is exactly establish what your delegates are, because you're a delegate body. Right? Not everybody at state Grange has the right to vote. You're a delegate body. You can attend the meetings, but you don't have the right to vote, and who can speak at your meetings. And it's a lot smaller than the national Grange bylaws. It's about 11 pages long, so a lot smaller. A lot easier to read also, I will say. So that's your state Grange bylaws. And again, we have our ways that we can amend our bylaws. One of the things is a bylaw change has to be in by, I think it's September 1st, isn't it, Todd? You're shaking your head, yes, but you're muted. So
yes, yes.
So there's steps you have to take to change the bylaws that are different than a normal resolution. And so those have to move forward. If one comes in after that date, it has to be held over till the next year. That's just the way the rulings are. Finally, now down to your community Grange bylaws. I'd be willing to bet, other than Stephanie's Grange, which is Greenfield Hills, I think, isn't it, Stephanie? I'm trying to remember, yeah. A lot of people haven't looked at their community Grange bylaws in years. In fact, some people probably don't even know where their bylaws are, their community Grange. We did a study a couple of years ago asking for them, and we had a hard time getting all the community Grange bylaws. I don't know if you have them all yet, Todd, but so it's important to find your bylaws. It's important to establish a bylaw committee every so often. There's a bylaw committee established for National Grange who's looking at rewriting our bylaws. It's important that we look at them and do that. Now, our subordinate Grange bylaws are usually less than 5 pages. And we have some standard forms that were really made up when we formed the 3 new community Pomona Granges. And that gave us a format to follow, a template to follow, I guess is a better way. You don't have to do it exactly, but it makes sense. What should your bylaws say? You should usually say, again, that you follow the state and local bylaws. You should usually set a time and place for your meetings. It should usually have certain responsibilities written in there. And it should have a section in there on how you amend your bylaws. And it shouldn't be easy to do. I would recommend to you, anybody who's amending their bylaws, that it takes at least 2 meetings. They're read, they're discussed, they're held over to the next meeting to be voted on. Because people should have the right to think about it. As I said to you, what's the major thing the bylaws do? They protect everybody's rights. So it shouldn't be easy to do. But I think, again, I know we've had a template we use. I know Vermont State Grange had a template they provided to the State Grange. So I think there's some way to look at that.
Bill, on your question about the filing of the bylaws with the State Grange, we did ask for them. We probably got about maybe 25% of them. But interestingly, what invariably happens is the Grange will come back to us a year or 2 later and say, we can't find our bylaws. Can you give us a copy of what you have on file? And we don't have them. So
Right.
I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure you put them on file with the State Grange and keep updating them with the State Grange as you make changes so that we have the most up-to-date copy, because secretaries change. And I don't know how many times in the past year I've heard of secretaries who've lost records or officers have changed and things disappear and they no longer have half of their paperwork that they should have. So
Right. And they're probably in that box that's in the back of the storage cabinet that nobody's looked at in 20 years.
or a family member cleans out the house and
Yes.
doesn't know what they're looking at and tosses it in the dumpster. So,
But I will give kudos to Riverton Grange because they've just rewritten their bylaws and went through that tough process. And I think David will agree with me that it's not an easy process to rewrite your bylaws.
And that's what I wanted to mention, Phil, having just gone through this. I was told that we needed to file our new amended bylaws with the state president and the state secretary. So we submitted them. And I didn't know that we had to do this, but because of the program I'm in at National Grange, they said you're supposed to do this. They said it was a requirement. I had never heard of it.
Again, it's always been there, but it's, a lot of things fall through the cracks until somebody objects to it. And then you have to make the ruling in the bylaws. And I don't know, I have yet to talk to a national master or a state master who has said, I'm real happy that I had to make that ruling. It's, it's not, and Noel's there and I know Jody's there. I don't think you won't disagree with me that it's not something you take lightly. I asked you to do some readings and I know we're running late. There's one other section we wanted to do before I get into that. Because I think it was Stephanie who raised the question earlier in our discussions about what a presiding officer can do and how they can vote and how they can discuss an issue. Was it you, Stephanie, that raised that, or was it somebody else? It doesn't matter, but
It doesn't matter. I was told I can't vote, so I assume that's true.
Yes and no. Most of the time, according to Robert's rules, the presiding officer can't vote in a large meeting. All right, so you can't vote if it's a large meeting. Sometimes in a smaller meeting, the president will, or chairman of the committee will vote. The difference is that you don't get a second vote. You can't break a tie. All right, if you
I
vote,
was
you
told
can't,
just the opposite.
if you vote the first time, you can't break a tie. You can't have a second vote. So I would say to you, most times you don't want to vote as the president.
Okay,
You want that to go on. You want the vote to take place. If there's a tie vote, you as the president, if you have not voted, have the right to break the tie. There's a tie vote and you voted, the vote fails.
and you can't.
Remember, any tie vote fails. You need a majority. The other question was raised, does the president have the right to speak? President has a right to speak to clarify an issue, as long as they are not biased in any way. You can't give your biased opinion if you're clarifying an issue.
And what happens if they do?
Then they must step down from the chair.
And what does that mean?
If you want to speak on an issue, you need to then turn to somebody else in your meeting, usually your overseer or vice president, and say, please come and take my station. I want to speak on this issue. If you then speak on that issue, you cannot take the chair back until the vote is taken on that issue. All right? So it's not something you do lightly, because you've now given the control of the meeting to somebody else. That doesn't mean you can't say, if somebody makes a false statement, and it's truly a false statement, you can't say, excuse me, the facts are, in a non-biased way, this is what really happened here. So you have the right to clarify an issue, but you do not have the right to give your an opinion on an issue. And again, it's how you take the vote. And if you're sitting there and you're in a Grange meeting with 14 members, it's a lot easier to sit there and just count the vote and count yourself in to begin with. If you're sitting in a Grange meeting like we are, a state Grange session, where there's 100 votes or 80 votes, whatever the votes happen to be, you do not want to be put in the position where you're casting a vote. So I've always been more comfortable not voting and then breaking a tie, but sometimes you have to make a statement. And those of you who know me well enough to see me at state Grange session know that there are times that I give my opinion. And there were times when I stepped down from the chair as state Grange president and gave my opinion. But it's a very difficult thing to do because you're giving up the floor. You no longer now control how that meeting goes. Okay. I hope you had a chance to do some of the readings, and I'm not going to go through everything that we asked, but I had some points I wanted to bring out on the readings. Does that answer the question about the president voting? I know it was brought up earlier, and we promised you we'd discuss it, and I wanted to discuss it. Again, if you looked at the Constitution and bylaws sections, the first ones of the readings, you saw that as Rob said, it defines who we are. Back to 1870, I forgot when the first ones were written, the year, but back to that point when the first National Master wrote them. And it tells who we are. We all think that our name is the Grange, right? That is not our official name. Our official name is we are the patrons of husbandry. And we have divisions, and one of them being called the National Grange. So when you look at what we really are, and when you want to know what our organization stands for, we are the patrons of husbandry. So that's a key. I really pointed out the section on from 2.51 to 2.57 on nonpartisanship. And the reason I wanted to do that is because that's one of the standards of the national organization and of each one of our organizations. We're not allowed to be partisan in any way. Doesn't mean we don't take strong stands on issues and we discuss it. But what it's really done, it's allowed us to be mediators in a number of discussions on both a state and national level with different political parties. Because we go in there saying, we're not taking a partisan issue side on this. We're bringing forward a point. And I will tell you, those of you who don't know me, I was a past state legislator. I really appreciate it when somebody came to me to discuss an issue that wasn't just set on a partisan side. And we hear that on a national Grange level as well. So it's a key to do that. And at one point we had a Grange that was going to start in a state that never had a state Grange. And one of the things they were going to do was start as a partisan organization. And we told them, no, you cannot form a Grange that way. And we never organized that Grange because they were definitely going to be partisan in an issue. No, I might have agreed with their partisan stand, but I still said, no, you can't form. And I joke and say, I was a state rep. My Grange, even though I was a past master of my Grange, they couldn't endorse me as a state representative. So again, it's an issue that I take very seriously, and I know a lot of us do. As leaders of your community Grange, truly look over section 4.4.3, which is on page 4, the disposition of assets. That's the selling of a Grange home. That's selling of any property you have. When I talk about we're defending the rights of every member, that section really comes into play. You can't just sell a piece of property. You can't just, and the word was used before, and I'll just use it. You can't take a lien on your property without going through the proper steps. Because that property does not belong to the current members of that Grange. That property belongs to the past members, the current members, and the former members of that Grange. And it's defined in our bylaws exactly what they can do. And when I talked about the problem we had with the California State Grange, that was the biggest fight we had because they wanted to take some Grange property. And we won in federal court because of that, and it followed our bylaws. And it followed these exact wordings of our bylaws where there have been other cases. So that's a very important place to look at. And again, there's a section on amending the bylaws. There's a section on the whole Grange organization, and we talk about who we are. And I think you should look at that. But
Quick question.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You're talking about maybe selling just something that is a part of the Grange. In particular, we have a printing press. It's very old. It's in our basement. I think it's worth something. A lot of members think it is. Should we, I mean, if we sold it, we would only put all the money back towards our treasure, towards the Grange. But is that something that would be covered by these?
I believe something as big an asset as that would be covered, yes. And
Okay.
what you should do is notify, and I would talk to the state Grange president about that, but I would notify them that you're looking at selling it. And when you go forward with all the steps, the executive committee of this Connecticut State Grange would have to approve that. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm giving you my opinion. I can't give you a ruling.
No, that's fine.
So
You're
but
not
I
doing
think,
anything. So.
Sage
if you're looking at a
advice.
big asset like that, I would say so. If you're just getting rid of some.
It could be not a big issue. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So.
And that court case has actually come forward where there was a Grange in another state that actually found a picture they had that when it was appraised was worth $100,000.
Uh-huh.
And they just wanted to sell it and take the money. And the state Grange said, no, you have to tell us, And so I'm not saying you're in that exact same situation, but.
I doubt it.
So
Okay.
that's there. But what I would say, as leaders of your subordinate Grange, there are certain changes to Robert's rules that we do in our meetings that are written in the bylaws. So if you are the president of a state Grange, I would suggest you read page 52 to 55 just to see how Grange parliamentary procedure might change a little bit from Robert's rules. We follow Robert's rules in general, but there's a few changes. And probably the key rule is a motion to adjourn is never allowed in a Grange meeting. You can't move to adjourn a Grange meeting. You have to follow the ritual. There's been a lot of times we wanted to move to adjourn a meeting, but that's not allowed. So I would look at that. And then just lastly, and I know I've gone over and I apologize, if you look at the state Grange bylaws, I think it's important to look at who the voting members are at a state Grange delegate body, which is section 3 and 4 on page 1, and also when they have a meeting. And the big surprise is on section 6, and I just threw it in there. So how many, see if how many of you read it. How many Grangers does it take to have a quorum at state Grange? How many voting members?
13.
13, because we had a quorum call once and none of us knew exactly. We had to look it up.
The baker's dozen.
Yeah, so we all couldn't believe it. Jody and Todd, I'm sorry I went a little long, but hopefully that went over to bylaws. I am a very strong believer in bylaws, if you didn't understand that from my discussion.
Does anyone have any questions? This is a good opportunity to ask. If it's a ruling question, obviously that would be directed to the state president. But if it's, just, about a specific clause, then, Phil or Noel or Bob or myself could probably answer it for you, because unfortunately, Todd's very versed with the digest at this point too, so.
Is there some way that Todd can send out the template for the bylaws?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They used to be, the National Grange bylaws were in this little book, and you got all these yellow pages in, and you had to keep it updated. Now it comes, you can buy it, but it's all online, and it's very easy to look it up online and print your own copies rather than buying the nice book.
Maybe use that printing press to print your own copies that Stephanie has in her basement.
Yeah, maybe Stephanie can print a few hundred copies. But
Another good thing to note is the national, the subordinate manual is now a free download from the national website. So if you have an outdated manual and you want to have a good copy of the new one, you can download it for free from the national website.
Karen has a question.
Thank you, Jody. As Stephanie says, Greenfield Hills, we're just got started with revising our bylaws. Is there some place that when we have our best draft to someone in the state that knows better than we do to run it past them before we take a vote with our full membership? Any suggestions?
I'd say send it to the central office and I'll forward copies to the state master and for review, and someone will be back in touch with you with any recommendations.
Todd, or I guess Karen, I would look at what Nutmeg Pomona's bylaws look like.
We have those.
Okay, and I would use those, and I think there's Todd has a general outline that's just a help for you.
Okay, and Todd was helpful sending some other ones from around the state too. Thank you.
These are your bylaws. They don't have to be exactly like everybody else's, but they just can't go against the national or state bylaws.
Rob has a question.
Well, it's not a question, it's a comment. Everybody that comes to state Grange session is going to see the result or have it explained to them, the result of a resolution that passed National Grange last year, and that concerns the salutation for the 6th degree. There is a change. And somewhere before we all do that in the opening ritual, I will explain that change so that everybody knows what has changed and how to do the new changed.
The
So
new sign of the 6th degree.
The new sign of the 6th degree. Yes, the sign has changed for good reason. But I will update you all, so stay tuned.
Quick question. I've had a couple of members who are interested in getting the 6th degree at the state thing in October. How do I set that up? Would I talk to Todd?
There was a form that went out to all of the Granges
Yeah.
a couple weeks ago. If you have access to that form, you can send that in. I can also email you a copy of it. It's not the ticket. It just asks for the information, the name, address, and you send in your payment, and then I will return a ticket to the person. There it is.
And is there a deadline for us to get that?
Stephanie, there's an application for the 6th degree on the bottom of this form.
Okay.
And you would clip it off and return it to Todd. And at some point along the way, you'll have to pay the fee.
Sure.
So you can enclose the fee if you know they're definitely going to be there ahead of time to save us collecting it at the degree.
It's
Okay.
$10.
And Stephanie, you
There's
understand
no-
they have to be Stephanie, you understand they have to be a Pomona member first with a 5th degree.
Okay.
Which means they either have to take the 5th degree, have taken it, or be obligated on it, which if you do not have the wherewithal to put on the 5th degree and these people don't have the 5th degree, get in touch with me and I can arrange to obligate them on the 5th degree.
So
Okay.
actually, no.
No,
It has, yeah, no, but under Dwayne,
corrected.
yeah, I apologize, but under Dwayne Wetmore, the obligation ceremony is not to be used, of the 5th degree is not to be used unless it's an emergency.
Unless an emergency. Okay, I stand corrected. So
Yeah, no, that goes all the way back to Dwayne Wetmore, and it's
Okay.
never been changed.
Nobody has ever asked to have it changed.
Is it in writing?
It was in when the obligation ceremony of the 5th degree was brought up.
Concocted.
Yeah, it was never truly adopted, right? Because
I said concocted.
Oh, concocted. No. So Dwayne Wetmore set up a team to learn the obligation. It was presented at state session, and then a resolution then said it was not to be used in the Connecticut State Grange unless I believe it was unless performed by the state master only under emergency purposes.
Okay, well, I remember the part about the state master, but thank you for refreshing my memory, since that probably went back to my very early days in the Grange, and I might not have known all the details, as I evidently didn't. Thank
I think the
you.
only time it's been used is just prior to a national session when it was mathematically impossible for somebody to receive.
No,
5th degree.
so
Yeah.
it was used. It was used once. It was used once under my administration because the person who it was used on was in the hospital for surgery when the 5th degree was performed at their Pomona. So,
Well, I have to say I used it once at the last national session when it was impossible for said person to have taken the 5th degree. It was logistically impossible.
and it's your call whether it's an emergency or not.
Fair enough.
Only,
That's right.
only you make that determination. No one else.
So Stephanie, to answer your last question, there is no deadline. I prefer to know ahead of time, though. We'll take candidates at the door, what will be 9:30 in the morning. That's when we ask candidates to be at the hotel on that Saturday morning for the degree. But sooner the better, if you know if you're going to take the degree. It's just so we can make sure we have enough roses and all the arrangements are properly made.
Yep. Thank you.
And that should have just, that discussion we just had should have given everybody an idea for a resolution.
Ditto. Copy that.
Isn't it too late for this year?
No, that's
No.
not a bylaw change.
It's not a bylaw change.
Yeah, it's a policy, but it's not in the bylaws.
But it's got to go through a Grange, so.
Hmm.
My deadline's the 15th, but if you notify me of when your Grange is meeting to discuss a resolution of any type, some allowances could be made.
Well,
Todd is
especially those-
reasonable.
Rob,
I said Todd is reasonable.
right? Yeah, Rob, I wanted to let you know your topic came up at National Grange today. We were talking about how things need to change with the time, and that salute topic came up. And so I told everybody on the call to Google saluting the American flag pre-World War II. And there you'll see our 6-degree salute.
So that's right.
Up until 1940, that's how we saluted the American flag.
That's right. Yeah. I had read that.
Never changed and until then. So, but it's just interesting how things don't always keep up with the time. So
We have a member here in Connecticut of the Hebrew faith who was quite aghast when she witnessed that salute at the opening session of the state Grange in one of the recent years past. So it's like somebody said, you only have one chance to make an impression, and it's not what you meant, it's what other people see, even though you might not have meant what they get out of what passes.
And again, as we talked earlier about empathy, it's not always what you say, it's how people hear you.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Right. Todd, what is our reading instructions?
The rest of the book.
And is there certain instructions about the parliamentary procedure book?
Nope. My understanding, there is no homework yet. I asked about that. He just asked that everybody familiarize themselves with the book because it's very basic. Basic rules on running a meeting, and we're going to go from there. So
The specific page numbers are 204 to 217, if you need to remember where to start.
And so our last meeting is the 24th for learning, but everyone who is not, so we got to talk about that. So everyone will be invited to the banquet. We will have a quote unquote, for the lack of a better term, a graduation ceremony. So everybody who has participated in this program that was registered will go through the, lack of a better term, graduation. And we're already talking about repeating this possibly next year or the year after, but we're definitely looking at putting together a Leadership Academy 2.0. By a show of hands, is there any interest in that? So, okay. And that's good. Those are going to be longer sessions, and definitely much more in depth on some of these topics, like this, for example, right? The bylaws and parliamentary procedure will be much more in depth because it's what keeps us safe, right? It's those documents, those rules that keep us safe. So, all right. If no one has anything else, Phil, we can't thank you enough for
Thank you,
bringing
Phil.
up your expertise. And yeah,
I just have a quick,
it
I have a quick
definitely
question,
does.
Phil.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
It was mentioned so I printed out like all of the bylaws and stuff to put in a binder just so I'd have them. Pomona bylaws, how are they related to, I mean, like, does the subordinate Granges still answer to Pomona bylaws, then to state, then to national, or is it skip a beat because?
In general, Pomona and subordinate just respond to state.
Okay,
There's not a true, yes, you're part of a Pomona,
right.
but those bylaws tend to be very much the same. That's why I
Okay.
didn't go into that detail.
Okay,
I don't think any, and Todd could correct me, I don't think any of the Pomona's bylaws say that the subordinate Granges within their jurisdiction will follow their bylaws. But,
No.
okay,
so
okay.
We-
All right, just curious.
Yeah,
I
we've
think
never
they
been-
say the same thing. They'll follow the state and national bylaws.
Especially since the reorganization, they're very, very much the same now.
Right.
Cool.
Can I just get Ally's phone number before we
Sure.
end?
203
Uh-huh,
671
yep.
4089.
Thank you so much. I'll be in touch. about
Okay,
the
great.
printing.
I'm helping her. I do insurance appraisals. So I'm helping her out with the value. And I used to be a printer.
If anybody, I think if you have Todd's emails out on this, you have my email.
mhm.
But it's a little hard to find my email on national and I'm not in the state anymore. It's Philip with 2 L's, .Prelli, Prelli, at snet.net. I don't want to say it's an old email, but
It's an old email.
He's not AOL.
I am, but I have to
that's
say
net.net,
I've got the
so-
same little handle for AOL and Gmail, so I did halfway correct my error.
So if you have any questions and you'd like my response from tonight's meeting, feel free to email me.
Cool. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Night.
Have a good night.
Night.